is our Environmental Action Committee, and for over a year now, we've been having these conversations, we're calling it, with people who have some expertise in different areas where we feel it's important for others to learn about what we can do to make some impact in the area of climate change and the environmental sustainability. And we've had some really interesting conversations throughout the past year, actually more than a year. And all of those are available on our website. There are links to excellent recordings, and we hope that any of you who have not seen the series would go there and see what we have available. I guess I'm very proud to be part of this group from King's Chapel. It's just kind of emerged out of people seeing the need for taking action in some way. And we have great community support and support from our members of our congregation, and especially from our leaders, Joy Fallon and David Waters. So we welcome all of you, first-time people, as well as those of you who have been here before. And we hope that this talk tonight will bring you more information about what you can do, what we all can do as we face the future of our communities and our environment and our planet. So with that, head on to Sylvia.
I'm a member of the steering committee as well. And it's my great pleasure to introduce once again Scott Budde, who is the president and CEO of the Maine Harvest Federal Credit Union. I should interrupt just to say that he is eminently Googleable. You can read all about him. And so I'm going to hit the high spots. He comes to us with 30 years of experience, 30 plus years in investment management, banking, and consulting, with a focus on environmental and social impact. Before moving to Maine from New York City, he and his wife worked for TIAA, which was a pension and investment firm, as you all know, I'm sure. He created the firm's first investment department, which was focused on the social and impacts of investing. He graduated from Bowdoin College and has a master's in international affairs from Columbia. He is the author of Compelling Returns, which is informative, but now not available.
Very limited edition, let's say.
Well, you can borrow mine if I could find it. On a human interest note, he and his wife, Shari, are owned by their little terrier poodle mix dog, Casco. And now the very fine Scott Budde.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. Yeah, thank you so much. You'll get more on the dog in the presentation. We'll just say that. And so I'm going to call up the slides and start talking, and I'm going to try and talk for only about 20 minutes or so there should be plenty of time for Q&A. Okay. All right. Can everyone see that? Okay, great. Yeah, so welcome to the second part of investing and the environment. And thanks, Sylvia, for the introduction. In this one, we're going to focus on this question of divestment versus engagement. And that really means we're talking about stocks and stock funds within the investing world. And if you hear me use the term equity or equity funds, it's really just the same thing. And the last time we talked about banking and the environment, and I think that I don't know, that topic was a little more straightforward to me. It kind of boiled down to a lot of the big banks are the major source of financing for fossil fuels, and if you don't want to be involved with them, you have a lot of good alternatives. This is a little bit more complicated, just in the nuances. I thank you for calling me an expert. I would say on this topic, I'm not quite expert, but I've done a fair amount of work in it. But most importantly, because it's a bit dense, I have added the dog pictures to break it up so that, and there's the picture of Casco, if you can see her. Yeah, she's like about 25 pounds. It's very kind of scruffy. One little kid said she looks like a Dr. Seuss dog, which she kind of does. Okay. All right, so let's go on. So the big question here is, how can stock investing create environmental change? And if you ask this question, and you're interested in it, you'll quickly end up with, two, I don't want to say competing because they don't necessarily have to be, but two schools of thought. One is around divestment. That if you don't like the stock, you don't want to own ExxonMobil because of what they do, you don't own it. So divestment's one strategy, and the second strategy is engagement, which means basically working with the company largely often through voting on environmental issues at their annual meetings. So it's divestment on the one hand and engagement on the other. But before I'll get to those two and talk about them. And if you think I'm going to take an opinion on one of them, you'll be wrong. I'll be a bit neutral on these. But first, it's important to understand two ways of owning stock. You can either own it as an individual. You can have a share certificate under the bed, or you own it in a brokerage account, but you own that stock directly. And we'll just call that individual ownership, and that's a kind of common industry term. Or it can be institutional ownership. And so if you own a stock mutual fund that's managed by Fidelity is the institutional owner of that stock. It's not their money, it's your money, but they're investing it on your behalf, and they are the institutional owner. And I want to start with this graph. This is basically, I'm sorry it ends at 2013, which is 9 years out of date, but it goes back to 1945, which I thought it got some pluses for that. This is a graph of how stock has been owned in America over time. Well, how American stock has been owned over time. And if you go back to 1945, less than 10% of the stock in America was owned by institutions. Almost all of it was owned by individuals. And, over the next, 60 years, that, 90% plus is now down to 34%. So the vast majority of stock in the US is owned by these institutions: mutual funds, pension funds, government retirement funds, international investors, hedge funds, ETFs, others. These are all different types of institutions owning stock on behalf of clients, let's say, which could include individuals. So it's important to know both these strategies from the individual level and from an institutional level. So I'll try and do a little of that. Okay, so first, divestment. I think this is the easier to understand of the two of them. It's pretty straightforward. If you don't like it, you don't own it. The best rationale you could find, I think, from 350.org, which I know a number of you are familiar with. Here's their quote: "Not a penny more for dirty energy. Cut off the social license and financing for fossil fuel companies. Divest, desponsor, and defund." It's pretty straightforward. If you're an individual and you don't like the stock, you sell it. If you're an institutional owner and if you have it in an institutional fund, you would sell the fund. You might have to change the manager, but it's pretty straightforward how it works. And there are constraints. I don't want to spend a lot of time on. First of all, there's inertia. It's just a pain in the butt to, change things. People don't like to change things related to money. There are the logistics. There could be tax consequences. And if it's institutional ownership, there are those problems. And then there's also that there's limited choice. Like, I know, Sylvia, we were talking about this. If you have money like in a college savings plan, a 529 plan, or a retirement plan, you don't have unlimited choice. You might only be able to use certain managers and only certain funds. So sometimes you just have very limited choices of what you can pick from if it's through an institution. And I'll just say those constraints are similar when we get to engagement, so I won't talk about them again. But that's divestment. It's pretty straightforward. Then so now a little break, dog pick. The dog, she can swim. I mean, she is a poodle, so she actually swims pretty well, but she doesn't really like to swim, so she just sits. And this is a river. We live on a river in Maine, the Sheepshead River, and she just goes in the river and sits. And she doesn't have an ounce of fat on her. And that water there is probably about 50 degrees. And she'll just go in there and get in the mud and just sit there. And that's her. Okay. All right. So on to strategy 2, engagement. And I just said, it's basically, if you don't like it, vote. So just to review, if you own stock in a company, you own part of the company. And that gives you power to vote on issues that come up at their annual meeting, just like an annual meeting of an organization. And it's pretty simple. 1 share, 1 vote. If you own 10 shares and you have it on a certificate under the bed, you get 10 votes. If you're Vanguard and you own 1 million shares across different funds for hundreds of thousands of investors, you get 1 million votes. And because there are now environmental issues that come up for a vote at annual meetings, that creates the possibility of having environmental impact. And I think the easiest way to get at this is just to do an example. Okay, so, sorry, the rationale. There is a great organization called As You Sow, and they've been around for about 30 years, and they, I would say, are the leading organization, certainly in the US, on engagement and proxy voting to create social and environmental change. They've been around, I don't know, 30 plus years. And here's their rationale. So this is the equivalent of what 350.org said about divestment. As You Sow is saying, shareholder actions press corporations to undertake this broader risk analysis and make decisions that benefit people, the planet, and profit over the long term. So that's their rationale. If we were a foundation, that would be their, as they would say, theory of change in the foundation. So I think the easiest way to get at this, like what really are we talking about with this engagement thing, is to look at a sample. And so I went back a year because I wanted something that had been voted on. And I found this resolution. And this was resolution number 5 on the Chevron agenda for their annual meeting in 2021. And it's basically, you can read it there, but it's basically an environmental disclosure. So a couple things about these, motions at annual meetings. They come up in 2 ways. Either management proposes them, or other shareholders get together and propose them. If they own enough stock and they've owned it for enough time, they can get together and they can get something on the ballot, or try to. Not surprisingly, management usually is in support of everything that they propose. This is how management works, right? They like everything they propose. They often don't like what everybody else proposes, and we'll get to that some more. But here's a pretty straightforward resolution. It basically says that the board should look at the effect of reducing fossil fuel demand on its financials, and they should report back to shareholders in a year. Okay, and you can see that, and this is from As You Sow. As You Sow has a whole database of environmental resolutions. So if you want to look for them, just go to As You Sow and you can find this. It's called the Resolution Tracker. It sounds like a, New Year's app for tracking your resolutions, but it's for tracking resolutions at corporations. And you can see over on the right that this motion got 47.8% of the vote. Needs 50% to +1 to pass. So this measure did not pass, and we'll get to that. But this is very typical of the type of resolution that might come up related to the environment. Some of them might be outright bans. ExxonMobil had one year that was just telling them that they should never drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So they can take lots of different forms, and shareholders that are progressive and trying to create environmental change have, now can get these on the ballot. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, if you were an so basically, who votes? Well, if you're an individual and you own the stock, you own a certificate or you've got it in a brokerage account, they send you this information, or they're supposed to, or your broker would send it to you, and you get a piece of paper and you can fill it by hand and send it back, or you might be able to do it online. So you vote, number of votes equals the number of shares, and your approach is whatever you want it to be. You can just read the ballot and decide, and it's no different than a proposition that might appear on an election ballot. If it's an institutional owner, the manager, the investment manager, like Fidelity or Vanguard or TIA or whoever, will vote on your behalf. And so they vote. And how do you know how they vote? Well, they all have to have something that is usually called their proxy voting guidelines. It's sometimes it's called something like stewardship. It has different, like Vanguard calls it their investment stewardship report, which I think is a bit of a misnomer. But here I provided a link to TIA and Vanguard, and you'll see why. But these proxy voting guidelines, I remember I read Fidelity's. It's now longer, but a few years ago it was 2 pages, and it basically said we'll vote any way management wants us to vote, and tough luck. That's it. But they can be quite detailed. They can be 20, 30 pages long. They could go into a lot of detail about specific issues and how they look at them. But that's where you would find out how your manager votes. You'd go to their website and look up proxy voting guidelines, and you find out. So let's look at it for this motion at Chevron for 2 investment firms. Okay, I'm going to pick. Okay, so first, where do you find this stuff? This is not for the faint of heart. There is a database at the Securities and Exchange Commission website called EDGAR. It stands for something like electronic document, blah, 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 something. I don't know what. It's the giant database of every filing related to public companies or investment funds in America. So there are, hundreds of thousands, tens of millions of pages of documents. It's not the most friendly thing in the world. I have to admit, it really is. It's a bit much. But anyway, there is good information on it. And investment firms file with the SEC how they voted. So let's look. We're going to pick TIA because I know them a bit. I'm not an apologist for TIA. I like TIA. There are things I wish they did differently and they could do better. But for a large investment firm on these issues, I think they're pretty good. And I'll compare them to Vanguard, the big mutual fund company. Okay, so here's the vote that appears in EDGAR. So if you haven't seen documents in fixed pitch, fonts in a while, here they are. I mean, this is how this database is really geeky. So let's look at these. So the resolutions are the same. Both TIA and Vanguard are voting at the same meeting. And you can see, let's look at TIA's where it says, here's the number of the proposal, and 1A through 1L are just elected a bunch of directors. 2 is ratifying the auditor. 3 is something about executive comp. 4 is something about emissions, which is an environmental issue. And 5 is our resolution, that Chevron resolution. This is the Chevron annual meeting. And 5 is that impact report for them to do the impact report. Then there's a column that says, what does management want you to do? How do they want you to vote? It's kind of skewed voting because management gets to tell you what they want, and there's not much for other people to tell you to vote. So management always wants you to vote for the things that they like and against the things that they don't like. It's pretty basic. So they've told you to vote for all these directors who they probably all know and have been on there forever, and to vote for their executive comp proposal, surprise, surprise, and to vote for their auditor. And management recommendation, and they've recommended that shareholders vote against this disclosure. But you can see the vote cast, it's the vote cast for the manager. TIA voted for it. And I think I've got a little. So you can see resolution 5, to do an impact report. Management recommended voting against it. TIA voted for it. But Vanguard, and I picked Vanguard because this is a contrast, management recommended voting against it, and Vanguard voted with management to vote against the proposal. So here are two managers, they're both big, and they took very different positions. And in fact, this mattered. I picked this in this scenario because it mattered a lot. Because we saw on our slide earlier that 47% of the shareholders voted in favor of the resolution, so it failed. But if any of these three large firms had voted for it, it would have swung the vote in favor. I would include, I can't remember how Fidelity voted on this, but any number of other firms could have swung it. But these are the three largest investment firms in the world for owning stock, and any of them could have, if Vanguard had voted the other way, if they had voted for the motion, it would have passed, and Chevron would have had to do something and disclose it. So that how your investment manager votes is important. And again, it's not their money, it's your money, right? So they should be doing it on your behalf. And if you don't like their proxy voting guidelines, I'd write them and tell them. Or you can move you can move funds if you want to. Let's see, let me on here. And success is possible through engagement. So I used a case where the motion didn't pass, but they can pass. And I'll explain this chart a little bit. The most important is this light blue line here, which is the percentage of voting in favor of environmental policy resolutions. And just since 2018, it's now up to 37%. And that's the average. Okay, 37% wouldn't pass, but there are many that are starting to pass. And you can see in 2021, 80 motions were filed, 28 appeared on the ballot, and 8 of them passed. And 8 may not seem like a lot, but you have to remember that of those 80, some of them might have been withdrawn because the activists that were bringing up the vote may have negotiated with management. Management often wants to it's like settling out of court, right? It's like, they don't want it to go on the ballot, so they want to settle out of court. So they meet with activists and then they reach an agreement, and then the activist withdraws the resolution, and the company does whatever they said they were going to do. So there is success in engagement, and this has been a key tool in getting environmental disclosures out of a number of companies and in changing some of their behavior. So on, which one of these strategies? Okay, so there's this balance of divestment versus engagement. Like I said, I'm not going to take an opinion on which one. I think in speaking with individual investors, a lot of it just boils down to preference and logistics. Some people just don't want any association with, stocks that don't reflect their values. And if that's the case, they're going to gravitate toward divestment. If they warm up to this strategy of, engaging with companies and trying to vote on progressive or environmental issues, then, they gravitate toward engagement. And I'll tell you, there are some very progressive groups that deliberately go out and own stock in hideous companies solely to get measures on the ballot. And there are people who go out and just buy stock in ExxonMobil just so they can vote on issues related to ExxonMobil. So, but I wanted to leave you with a quote from something completely different about the demise of apartheid in 1994. And apartheid fell after all sorts of activism, on the ground activism, boycotts, divestitures, corporate engagement, all sorts of things happened to bring down apartheid in 1994. And there is an amazing researcher who in 1997 wrote a book. I've met this guy, he's amazing. His name's Robert Massey, and he wrote this book called Loosing the Bonds. I wish I had this in 3D because the book is 1,000 pages long and I have not read it. Okay, read large chunks of it, but I have not read it cover to cover because it is 1,000 pages long. But, he's a good academic researcher, so it's quite thorough and very footnoted. And he was looking at what were the factors that led to apartheid, what worked, what worked out of all the things that happened. And he, spent years of his life doing this and writing this book. And here's the conclusion in the last page of the last chapter is basically thousands of small acts of commitment and protest, from demonstrations to letter writing to voting shares, many of them derided at the time as inconsequential, steadily accumulated into a force that altered history and brought forth justice. So I think that's one of the reasons why I'm I'm neutral on these two strategies, and I've worked on both of them, because I think you just don't know where impact is going to happen. And this is, I think, a pretty good example, this reference from apartheid. Okay, so that is, those are the two. And those are the two options. I mean, you could probably find some more, but those are the two main options with owning stock. There's the last dog picture. Okay, this one is staged a bit, but she does, sleep under the covers like a good, small dog. And when she comes out, she's often wrapped up like this. So she gets this kind of, I was going to say Russian grandmother. We'll say Ukrainian grandmother kind of look to her when she comes out of these. So Ken, I mean, we can take questions. Why don't I stop sharing? If we have to go back, to the slides, we can do that. That's no trouble. And, we can take questions, talk, raise your hand, put it in the chat. We'll deal with any of those.
And remember to unmute yourself and remute yourself.
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah. Dory, your hand went up very quickly.
Yeah, hey.
Well,
You're muted.
Sorry, you're muted, and I might have muted you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
I with regard to the example you gave, Vanguard TIAA. So let's say 100 people to each company wrote in and said, vote yes on the Chevron thing, and let's say 10 people for each company said vote no. What is the process by which those companies figure out how they're going to vote? I mean,
yeah, wow, yeah, very important question to ask. Well, let me speak for TIA because I know it a bit. First, TIA probably has, 5 million clients, investors around the country. Very few of them voice an opinion. So if you got 100 people to write in and say, you really need to make sure you're voting yes or no on this issue, I think they would really notice. And I would also say that TIA's proxy voting guidelines. You know what? Did I miss I missed a slide. There was a slide in there about overall voting records on environmental issues. And in general, TIA was voting about 60 to 70% in favor of them. And Vanguard was voting about 15 or 16% in favor of them. I did look up Fidelity just because it's in Boston. Fidelity was a little bit better than Vanguard, but nothing to write home about, frankly. And I would say TIA's proxy voting guidelines reflect its client base, which is largely it's mostly academics in their pension plans, and they tend to be more progressive than the population in general. And so TIA is more active on this issue than your average large firm. I would compare them to a large firm. There are small firms that might be extraordinarily progressive, where you could call them up and they would talk to you. Well, you could probably find someone at TIA who would talk to you, but so I think if you got 100 people, I think even a large firm would listen. They're not going to change their guidelines. So it would be good to use their guidelines and say, to try and see if there's precedent in their guidelines to get them to do it. Like on page 4, you said you like disclosure. So why aren't you voting for this? You know, that kind of thing. I guess, Jane, you have your hand up. And you're on mute. Oh, there.
Just following up, you said you missed the slide on the vote on how to find their voting records. And is that also at that same website? The
that Edgar one.
government?
Yeah. Yeah, that is
Okay.
there. You don't get, unfortunately, you don't get a nice, neat summary. One of the organizations you could follow if you wanted that, you could go to As You Sow, might have something. Or there's a great organization, this is in one of the footnotes, called CERES, which is the Council on Environmental Responsibility and something. It's a great organization. It's in Boston, actually, right downtown, that does, it's an environmental lobbying, research, activist organization. And they would also have reports on, I mean, if you Googled environmental voting records of managers, you would get to someone and they would tell you. You could find that pretty quickly, I think.
Okay.
And the Edgar thing would be useless and it would drive you crazy.
Okay.
So maybe stay away.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
I guess a question.
Yeah, Cynthia, yeah.
So what possibility does one person have if I don't have 100 people rallied to state, you know, an outcome that I would like? And
Right. Well, this is not, if you're trying to, well, let's say you're trying to, you're trying to have impact on an institutional investor. You own a mutual fund, and what can you do? I will say, like what, kind of getting at what Dory mentioned, not many people do this. So if you wrote a manager, I think they would, they would note it. I mean, really large firms, maybe not so much, but I think you would take notice. Also, if you want to be involved in shareholder activism, and you want to support an organization, As You Sow is a nonprofit and does amazing work, and like I have given money to them. That's another option. If you really want to do something as an individual, you could open a brokerage account, buy some shares yourself, hold them for a period of time, and then go to the annual meeting and make a statement. And you'll get in and you could stand up and give Chevron a piece of your mind. And there's some great activist nuns out there who do this all the time and give them and I mean, that's a bit extreme, and they tend to move their annual meetings around. So, you might have to, fly somewhere. It's not a great answer. I mean, but I think it's, you do something. These are all strategies. They're not, that are designed to have, marginal impact, and you try and get more and more. And just like 350.org tries to sign people up for divestment, As You Sow is out there trying to sign up large investment firms. You might, if you had a pension fund, through your employer, you might even talk to your employer about it. Even if you're retired, you can go back to your employer and you can talk to them.
thanks, Scott. I think Yvette has a question.
Yeah, please.
Hi, thank you for this, Scott. This is great. I just had a big discussion with my financial advisor about this topic, and it was not an entirely happy conversation for me. But I wanted to come back because I didn't completely catch the magnitude of what you said when you were talking about the three, the TIAA, the Vanguard, and the Fidelity in terms of their general performance on environmental issues.
Can I see it? Let me look at my, I just want to see if, did I like delete a slide here? I did delete a slide. Okay. Yeah. So I don't know how I did that, but so Ceres, this organization I mentioned, went out and looked at some big investment firms. And if you Google Ceres, CERES, I think you could find this report pretty quickly. And it looked at how did the big investment firms like TIAA, Fidelity, Vanguard, BlackRock, and it looked all over the world. Overall, how do they vote on, and this is kind of what Jane might have been getting at, it's overall, how do they vote? Because Edgar is not going to tell you that. Edgar is just going to give you all data, and you would have to build a giant database and add it up. And of those, the three I remember were TIA voted in favor of environmental disclosure issues. Usually management's always recommending you vote against. So TIA is saying to vote in favor of environmental disclosures and environmental related votes. And Vanguard and Fidelity were in the 15% range. And TIA was 60 to 70. So it's a big difference.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about your investment manager thing. It's tedious, but there are there are firms where you would love to talk to you about this. So that's not, you can find other options if you want to.
Have to do more research.
If you're are you around Boston?
Yep.
Trillium Investments is an option. They're a smaller investment firm, but they specialize in social investing. But there are a couple firms around Boston, small ones, that they might have like minimum amounts though that might be a bit problematic.
Sylvia, you had a
I'm
question.
sorry. Kent, you had a question. Sorry. Or Sylvia.
Okay. Am I muted?
No.
Okay. My question was this, Scott, on your slide about South Africa, I wanted to be sure I got your point in that. Were you saying that the shareholder voting had more of an effect than divestment?
No, thank you. I was trying to say that you don't know what strategies are going to work.
Oh, okay.
And I've spent probably 20 years in my career having really strong opinions about what works and what doesn't, only to decide that I don't really know. And in fact, this research on South Africa says, look, you're not going to know what changed, what brought down the Berlin Wall, how did that happen? And it's not like one thing, it's a bunch of stuff. So, and I think that pertains to divestment and versus engagement.
Okay, thanks.
Scott, I think my takeaway is that we all have to keep trying. It's a pain in the neck. It sounds to me like, especially the engagement one is a lot of work. But if we keep on just trying the small steps and many people doing small things, it's sort of like everything else, never underestimate the power of a small group of people making a lot of noise. I forget who said that, but and that's not what she said, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, even if you're meeting with your financial advisor, like Yvette's case, and it's not, give them a talking to. They're working for you. They can, tell them what you think. And you know what? Even if you're not going to change, tell them you're thinking about it. A good, maybe you can't change. Maybe it's just not possible to change, but you can threaten. That's fine. Steve and Alan both had their hands up.
I think Alan had his hand up well before I did.
Okay, I'll jump in. So one of the things I've always heard with respect to divestment is that it may not actually be accomplishing anything, even if a significant number of people vote to divest or divest their stocks. A significant number of people selling their stocks is going to lower the stock price and simply make it more attractive for other investors who don't care about the environment to buy that stock. That's been a major issue I've heard. I haven't heard you talk about that tonight. Scott.
Yeah, I would say that's true. Yeah, I mean, I tried to avoid, I mean, if you pressed me on these strategies, these two strategies, I would say I personally warm up more to engagement. If you're going to do it, if you're going to do something, then engagement, I warm up to a little more than divestment. And part of it is what you're saying, exactly what you said, which I think is true. There are a lot of, I can tell you the Dubai Sovereign Wealth Fund does not give a rat's tail about carbon emissions, right? So you can divest all you want. They've got hundreds of billions of dollars to buy up stock if they want to. But at the same time, investors, I certainly can understand that some investors want their money aligned with their values. And they have, just like in the bank, when we were talking about the bank, banking in the environment before, that's a very reasonable goal. And that alone, I think is reasonable for divestment, that people want that. And I think and divestment, if you pick smaller companies, you have the possibility of having a bigger effect too. So let's say that.
If I could just jump in with one further quick comment. I mean, I basically agree with you, and I've decided that kind of strategy, divestment, isn't for me. I happen to know a couple of people who work at Ceres.
Oh, good.
And that is the name. Maybe it once was an acronym, but it's now Ceres, CERES. And I put the website up in the chat.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Because it's a .org. It's a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And one of the things it does is it has organized an investor network of some of the biggest investors to try to get them to use their influence and power to do some of this stuff, particularly on the corporate resolutions and whatnot. And I think it's terrific. They've got a lot more power than I do. So one of the things I've done is, I've got some money in Vanguard and money in Fidelity that's probably earning a few bucks from oil companies. I'm taking some of that money each year and donating it to Ceres.
It's a good idea.
That's my strategy.
Yeah. Take your ExxonMobil dividends and, give, it's a great idea. Yeah. Thanks for adding the Ceres thing. They're, it's a great organization, and they are a pretty big tent organization. So they are trying to, they are trying to work with very large investment firms and, large companies. They are, they're, well, like I said, kind of big tent. Anyway, sorry, Steve, one of you.
Oh, excuse me. I told my financial advisor that I wanted to follow my moral compass and divest of the fossil fuel. And he said, fine, we'll probably have it done in 2 days. Could be 1 day, but it may be 2 days, because the organization they use, he doesn't invest my funds. It's through another organization, and they trigger that. And he said, and there are mixes set up in these organizations where you can divest in companies that have anything to do with guns or tobacco, or they're all pre-set up. And he just goes in and pushes a button and boom, my divestments are all done. So that was quite easy for me, and it was
Good.
what I wanted to do. I was really interested to hear about Cirrus. I will clearly look into that again, but because I don't pretend I know enough to ever try to manage my stock holdings, I have given it to some professionals who are able to manage those. And when I request something like that, it's done quite easily. So I'm very happy with that approach.
Great, great. Let's see, Dory or Chris? Both of you have your hand up.
I
Chris,
just unmuted. Oh, thank you. Yeah, great presentation. I'm wondering about if there should be a third category of alternatives, such as Energia, which allows you to fund solar arrays in the US, Africa, Brazil, whatever, and get a different type of return. And I'm assuming different kind of risk, but that's something that a financial advisor probably wouldn't advise you to do unless they're, fee-based. I mean, they tend to need to get paid. So is there a separate category that is motivated by our desire to support things that are good and avoid things that are bad, and things of that nature?
Yes, yeah. I mean that might fall under the term impact investing would be a common one. This came up a little bit in the bank presentation where there were some sort of proactive strategies, but yeah, you could call it a third one. I mean, sometimes you could loop it under a little bit under divestment, that if you're not going to own certain companies, you're going to own others, and those could be more actively sought out for specific themes like environmental themes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah, financial advisors are not a great, often not a great source for those kind of investments. There's some great, in the bank one, one of the ideas was there's a credit union in Boulder called Clean Energy Federal Credit Union. You just put a deposit in there. Pretty simple, government guaranteed, and you're financing solar power. And very easy, it's just a savings account or a CD or a checking account.
So Dory?
Yeah, I think I want to build mostly on what Yvette was talking about, which is the experience of speaking with financial advisors. But let me start by saying that one thing I think a lot about when I'm trying to manage investments is what I want my children to inherit from me. In other words, hopefully the whole structure of our economy is going to change a lot over the next 100 years. And best case, it's, we're not investing in railroads anymore, or steel, oil drilling and things like that. So to kind of reorient portfolios towards, it can't be the actual cutting edge, because that's still in an exploration phase. You can put some in that, but I think the consideration of what is it that you want your children to inherit is an important one. And do you really want them to inherit Chevron, which is one of the biggest fossil fuel carbon dioxide emitters in the whole world? It's one of the top 10. So anyway, I fall more in the divestment camp, and building on what Yvette was saying, when I talk to my guys, and they're all guys, they say, oh, well, because when you're in these mutual funds, you're basically mimicking the general economy. All right. So in addition
Many
to
of them, yeah.
yeah, and then there's a lot of the banking stocks in there, which we spoke about at your last talk. So say, I don't want to do that anymore. And they said, well, you know, Vanguard has sort of a green fund, and here it is. And then you go look at what's in that, and there's not Chevron in there, but it's got a lot of big social media companies in it, and that's how they kind of keep up with the economy is
Right.
these social media companies, which right now aren't doing very well. But so I think it was helpful to hear about your suggestion of Trillium. So I guess my question is, and maybe this could be a subject of a third talk that you could give, but are there any mainstream alternatives within these big investment firms like Fidelity and Vanguard? You know, are there any green funds that you think do have some credibility?
Well, I know within TIA, there's a family of social and environmentally screened funds. And they usually go under social choice equity, social choice bond, social choice international equity, that have, I think, a pretty rigorous screening methodology, but they still do own a lot of stocks. So they aren't a specialized, alternative energy fund. I think in the last presentation there was because a woman had mentioned it on the call, a list of green ETFs and funds, a link to that. I mean, you can find them. They're, they will be pretty specialized. They will probably not be that cheap. They'll have relatively higher expense ratios and things like that. But they're out there. I mean, there are more funds. Here's my favorite statistic in America. There are more funds, stock funds, than there are stocks in America. So think about that. There are more, and there are a lot more. There are only like 5,000 investable stocks in America. And there are, like 15,000 funds, which is just ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. And it's all, that's all passive investing. It's
it's all over. It's all over the place. I mean, but no, a lot of it, the dollars are passive, but these big managers, and I think Fidelity was the king of doing this, came out with all these specialized funds, because at one point, the more specialized the fund, there'll be some point where that fund is doing really, really well. And then you market the heck out of it, and people run into it, and then it tanks, and then people go out, and then you find a new specialty. And that's why, I think Fidelity led the world in this, these sort of specialty sector funds. So there's a lot of choice out there. I mean, I like, another option would be, and Chris kind of was getting at this, I think, is a kind of barbell approach. You have one part of your portfolio that's, kind of broadly diversified in stocks, maybe avoiding, the key fossil fuel sectors. And then you have, you allocate 10% towards some really juicy, proactive environmental investments, which I think you could find. Or it might be something pretty simple like that clean energy deposit, something like that, just as an option.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Scott.
Sure.
So if I could jump in, I'd actually include things like insulating your own house.
Sure.
If you can get a 15% ROI because you're spending so much less on heating your home, why not include that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, for us, we have the house I'm in here has a 20 kilowatt solar array and geothermal heating. Everything is electric. I have one small gas chainsaw, and other than that, everything's electric. And in Maine, there's very generous metering, so it's a good investment. You're getting great credits for anything that you have to sell to the grid. And I'd agree with you. It's a great and relatively conservative investment if you can make use of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would even lump in heat pump clothes dryer.
I do not have a heat pump clothes dryer, but that is the first thing I'm going to look up when we get off the call. You have a heat pump hot water heater.
Yes, those are
and
fantastic.
My favorite. I don't want to get too self-righteous, but I'm going to anyway. I do have America's first sit-down electric riding mower. It's a Cub Cadet, and it is not ready for prime time. It's got its issues, but it does do it. I mean, we live in a very rural area. We have a lot of fields and stuff, and that's why
that's
my
fantastic.
neighbor, my good crazy Maine neighbors think it's absolutely crazy. So that's how I know it's right.
You can't be mowing your lawn for free. I mean, that's you
can't. And Maine has great net metering laws. So it's Sylvia.
I was wondering what you think about a kind of proactive way of doing it is to invest in green companies, and they're cropping up all over the place. And there's some that are quite big now, but I don't know anything about them. And it's scary when you don't have a lot of money to invest.
Well, you can find, I mean, you could find some green investment funds that would invest in. So you're looking like I'm just thinking of larger companies like, I don't know, well, Patagonia is not a public company, but
No, I was thinking more the people who are producing green power, sun, solar.
Yeah, there. I mean, you can find mutual funds that'll invest in solar energy companies that are producing solar panels and things like that. You could find a fund that does that. Whenever you get a fund that is that specialized, it does tend to be more volatile than the market as a whole. So
Yeah,
it's not really, which is can be a little bit of a problem. You don't want to put everything in it, but
No.
Someone on the last call made a big pitch for Tesla, by the way, which I hope no one followed through on that one piece of advice, because that was, I mean, I'd cite it more as a problem of just putting all your eggs in one basket and why you want diversified portfolios in stocks or bonds or whatever you're investing in.
Thanks.
All right, well, maybe we're ready to wrap up. It's 6:03. I want to thank you, Scott. It was great. Great talk, great discussion. And we will put up the recording on our website, and I'll try and send an email to all who registered information about how to get it when it's ready. So we will see you in January, our next talk. We will announce it. We're not sure what it is, but we'll try and find something, keep everybody interested, and hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And thanks again.
Yeah, thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Sylvia.